two, one, let's go.
Just doing my thing.
You are tuned in to the voice of C38. I am notably not Brendan Wyatt. He is currently off in the middle of Yellowstone enjoying some vacation. In his place, you've got me, Colin Peterson. We've got a bit of a different crew today. Joining me, as always, is the Drunken Monk.
Well met.
And a special guest joining us again is Patrick Quinn.
Hello.
So, coming up here, we've got a discussion on the game in Houston and the surprising 3 points that we got out of that. We'll move on to the big discussion, which is the message from the C38 board members and their meeting with the front office. We'll take any questions that we've gotten and any from chat, and then we'll look ahead to the first home game in a while, actually, against NYCFC.
Awesome. So, Colin, since you started us out, how about you start out with your analysis of the game this weekend?
I'm still a little surprised we got 3 points. Don't get me wrong, that was a beautiful goal. That was absolutely beautiful. But overall, I felt like that game could have gone any way.
I agree. I was definitely... I thought we actually looked pretty good. Like, I thought we were going to go in there and not even compete, and I actually thought we were doing all right competition-wise. We had a couple things where, like, Howard had to make some big saves. But I'm glad. I was super excited to see Eigner again, and like I had guessed, he was going to be a huge impact on the field, and he got his first assist, and Baji gets that beautiful goal. There are very few players you're going to see that can drop a ball on a dime like that. Like, that assist was just insane. Like, where he put that ball was perfect. There's no other way to describe it but just perfect.
I'm going to take a phrase from the rabbi here. He hit that thing on about the size of a postage stamp.
So what was your thoughts, Quinn?
They kind of changed approaches for this game, which was interesting, but, he kind of set up the squad to play in more of a setup that you saw under Pablo when the team was more effective. You have the two central midfielders kind of back assisting the back line, and then they were just looking for counterattacks. It seemed to force Houston into a lot of mistakes, which is, I think, part of the reason why they looked so poor during the game. And in terms of Eigner, I pointed this out to a couple people that were at the viewing party at Station 26, but it's not just that his ball service is pretty darn good. Just watch him when he doesn't have the ball, like where he's moving, the runs he's making. He's very, very smart off the ball.
Yeah, and that's something that I feel that we have really missed this season and even last season, is movement off the ball on players. I'm constantly yelling about it when I'm in the stands or watching from a viewing party. I'm just like, why nobody's moving? Someone gets the ball, Doyle get the ball up top, and nobody's moving around him to try and either open up or anything. There's no movement off the ball, and you will not be an effective team, especially when you're trying to play more attacking-minded soccer by just standing around.
And that was one of the reasons why Jermaine Jones was so effective for us in the limited minutes he got for us last year, was his spatial awareness and his ability to move off the ball. Marco Papa was actually quite good at that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of like, I really would have loved to see more of Marco Papa back when he was here. I thought he was actually a pretty good player, but shit happens.
Yeah, it's a wasted opportunity.
He didn't really fit in with the Pablo Ball mentality we had.
No, but no real number 10 would.
That's also true.
So, talking about a number 10, I'm hoping we make a big signing in the offseason that could be a number 10 if we continue to try and do this formation and kind of push this mindset. But what about Eigner doing the role? We got to see him a little bit in the first game he played doing the role, and I think he was still playing it in this one a little bit. Seemed to be more outside, though, from what I saw. But what do you think of him filling that role, at least for the rest of the season, and maybe next season if he does a good job?
Given his ability and skill set, I would probably not do that, actually. I think he's far more useful on the wing, and it's nice when he can cut inside and make stuff happen, but generally speaking, I think he's much more effective, particularly when he's crossing the ball in the middle, which is sort of what our current team is built to do, and generally speaking, we don't get particularly quality service from the wings unless Gashi's on the field, so I think he's largely wasted if you plant him in the middle.
Yeah, and I think of it very similar to Gashi. Gashi, when we put him in that role, did okay at it because he's a good player, but it's not really where he belongs. Like, you put him on the outside, he can cut in a little bit easier. It also allows the speed to be there, especially for Gashi. We haven't really gotten to see a lot of speed from Eigner, but we also have only got to see him for like 40 minutes over a couple of games. Colin, you want to weigh in?
It's still a little early to see exactly how Eigner's going to fit in. But more than that, like you kind of said, we're going to see some pretty big roster changes over the off season. So I don't know. It's definitely a place he could fit into, but I don't know. I want to see more of what we can do with him.
Yeah, I agreed. I want to see more of him. I want to see him start. I was hoping he'd start last game, and I think that if he had started, we might have seen an even better outcome. That's like, I just feel that him coming in is what changed and got that goal. So if he had started, maybe you get that goal earlier, a little bit less heart attacks from your fans. That would be nice.
Yep.
It could be. I think he's just taking his time too, and there's not a ton of incentive to rush him out in the field if he's not feeling 100% capable of playing the full 90 either.
And that could be true, or maybe they wait and his first start is at home this weekend. That can always be a mindset from a front office point of view. They've done it in the past with us where they've saved a player for a home game as their big start, especially with how the team's doing and the factor there's not a lot to gain by having him be out there. So I'm hopeful we can see him start this weekend, but that's for later on in the cast. We do have a couple of questions from chat. Was Gashi injured or was he just sitting? I don't actually know the answer to that one. Does anybody know the answer?
I do not know the answer to that, but I would assume he was probably injured.
Yeah, so it look, from our man Juan, he's saying he was sitting, so he was being sat. I don't know why you would do that. If he wasn't injured, that's like put your best team out there. What do you have to lose?
If he was nursing an injury before, which I believe he was, he might have been match fit, but the condition of the pitch wasn't great in Houston, so I think they didn't want to risk it. I would assume that was probably the rationale behind that.
What did we think of Watts? He was playing defensive mid. I prefer him in the back of the lineup, playing central defender. That's just where I feel like he's a better player. I know that his natural position before was as a D mid, but he's been very good in my opinion overall as our central defender. So, you guys want to weigh in on that one, Colin?
I mean, I feel he did all right. I mean, Houston was not particularly successful at moving the ball through the midfield, and that to some extent is because of Watts, but also because of Azira as well. But I think kind of the results and the lack of offense that Houston showed in that game, and they're known to score goals, I think that's testament to the fact that I think he did fine. Yeah,
I was surprised by actually how well he did there. seeing as how he was kind of being played out of position. Like, I know I've seen him as a D mid before, but on the whole, I mean, he's pretty much always been a center back. So,
so we've got with Gat, Eigner, Cerna, and Gashi all presumably healthy. Are we heavy loaded on the wing, and what do we do about that?
something to think about with that too is you also kind of have to put Hairston in that list a little bit. Like he's a little more flexible. We can play him as a midfielder or on the right back, but it's an option to have him there.
I agree with that, but with the current roster composition and how thin we are at fullback, I would probably keep Hairston kind of as a right back rather than comparing him to an out-and-out winger like those other guys.
Mm. And who knows what we're going to see next season. Who we're going to put where, who we're going to ship off to where, who's sticking around, who we're going to bring in. Like, next year is a completely clean slate from a personnel perspective. Like, I don't think there's really too many players that can consider themselves safe. So and they need to make some huge moves for next season, which leads us into maybe into our discussion with the meeting about the front office, because I know we had they sat down with the senior board, which Quinn is on, so we brought him on to more so discuss that outside of his great soccer knowledge. So Quinn, do you want to start off with kind of explaining what the meeting was about and kind of go over an overview, and then we can kind of try and see if we can take some questions?
Well, I mean, it's just sort of recapping what I wrote in the letter, but essentially, basically the day before Pablo got fired, actually, we had fired off this email basically requesting the front office that we need to meet because, you know, we're unhappy with the direction of the club and all that, and we need to kind of air the grievances of our membership. And, you know, they didn't respond immediately because obviously the next day Pablo got let go and, you know, a lot of the dynamic changed. But they did eventually get back to us about a week later and said, yeah, let's have a meeting. So we set it up. And, you know, kind of the substance of the conversation, it was pretty relaxed. There wasn't a whole lot of structure to it. Some decent back and forth, but, you know, the overall substance of the conversation was kind of all the big plans that Wayne and Poreg have going forward. And it was definitely not the kind of meeting I was really expecting.
So did you, so with that meeting, you came out pretty positive, and that's not normally your state on the front office, based on our many years of history of arguing. So I really like to see that, and I know that you had chosen to pin the letter mainly on your own, and that I thought that was good. Would you like to kind of maybe explain why you did that? For those who don't really understand why it wouldn't just come from everybody like our normal, I guess, announcements.
I mean, the general consensus was when we walked out of that meeting, everybody felt fairly positive about it. But of course, we all are still kind of the wait and see thing. Time will tell over the next 4 to 6 months. But the reason I decided to kind of graft my name onto it above the other board members is that I thought that would carry a little bit more weight, because I think there's a delicate balance as an independent supporters group that we don't want to sound like we're just, you know, being a mouthpiece for the front office or any of that kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of quell the idea that we would ever be accused of doing that, because it absolutely is not the case. But, you know, a lot of people are angry, a lot of people are pessimistic, so, you know, we don't want to create a situation where it sounds like, you know, the leadership doesn't care about how the team performs or anything like that. We absolutely do, and it impacts us as an organization if the team's playing poorly. But yeah, generally I felt it would carry a little bit more weight if I just put a name on it, and if the name's on it, then people can kind of relate to it and put a face to it as well.
Is there any? Did they give any kind of more concrete details on what may be happening through the end of the season, or in the off season? Coach search, that kind of stuff that we might be able to discuss, or rumors, anything?
Unfortunately, can't really give you any names or anything like that, but we did talk about that to an extent. But again, I really can't say a whole lot about that in terms of rumors or anything like that, largely because I don't want to jeopardize any negotiation process that they're going through right now. In fact, Porig was in San Francisco on Saturday chatting with one of the candidates instead of actually being at the game in Houston, so it's definitely an ongoing process. We did talk a little bit about roster composition in the off season, in addition to the stuff I mentioned about how we're paying for players that are no longer here, but we actually discussed a little bit about current players on the roster as well, including, some people that will likely be back next year and other players that might not be so likely to come back next year.
And so with the coach search, I know we can't discuss who, but do you feel that they are going in the proper direction with it? Do you feel that they're really searching for a real coach, not just a handoff to Steve Cook or bringing in another Pablo or something to that nature?
I think it's safe to say that they're probably not going to do another hire like Pablo, and I really, really doubt that Cook will be given the full-time job. I mean, one of the things they discussed was, they created their own short list and essentially did an analytic process of kind of the metrics they were looking at in a coach in terms of their history, the performance of the teams that they've coached, that kind of thing. So they made a short list of that on their own, and they also contracted out to an independent firm in the UK to also compile a list. And then they're comparing those two short lists, and then from there they're starting to narrow down candidates. And that also doesn't include the 100-plus people that basically cold called them and sent in applications as well.
And we've talked about it before on the cast. This is a great opportunity for a coach coming into what essentially is a clean slate. As long as they have a mindset that matches Smith's, they basically are they have money to spend. They have, they can basically get rid of whoever they want to, I'm going to guess, some extent, and bring in, assuming they can afford them financially, whoever they want, which I think is a great sale for someone that is going into a coaching and managing role.
Yeah, they definitely have a little bit of a nicer sandbox to play with in terms of flexibility on the roster. I mean, there's no more of the, guaranteed bad contract nonsense where we're paying somebody that hasn't been on the squad for 2 years. I mean, that's all going away. That's going to free up enough salary for at least 1 to 2 solid MLS caliber first 11 starters for sure in terms of monies. And then of course you have the open DP slot, which I hope they use. I don't know whether they will or not, but to be honest, the DP isn't necessarily what this team needs. It needs a more solid core, and it's those kind of Midland guys where I think the roster needs the most improvement, because that's really where the meat and potatoes of MLS squads is. It's not the big stars. It's the guys that are just below them that are regular starters. They make a decent salary, but they're not bringing in, Michael Bradley money.
Well, and if you look at our team, we do have some people, and we've talked about it a little bit on the offensive side, that at some point in their career knew how to shoot. And so if we can get that to be more the mentality of the team and allow them a little bit more opportunities, not being under pressure and that kind of thing, maybe you get to see a little bit more active strikers out of Gashi, maybe Doyle if he comes back. That's, in my opinion, a little bit of a long shot. He'd have to take a pretty big pay cut to come back. You got Eigner, even Cerna, Baji. We do have talent up there to score. It just seems that either they've lost confidence or they're just not getting the ball in the right places. So maybe building a better core like you're talking about would help with that for that transition between the defense to the offense for better scoring opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, definitely individual players that can have more of an individual impact on the game and have a better soccer IQ. I mean, it's not just the fact of having confidence to shoot, it's being in good positions to shoot. I mean, oftentimes you see a guy at the top of the box and everybody's screaming at the TV for him to shoot the ball, but the thing you can't see unless you're down the field is whether he's got a truly open lane towards the goal or not. And the same thing goes for passing routes as well. And that has to do with both the positioning of the player that's on the ball as well as the positioning of the players around him.
So a question from chat from our man McCleve. Did they mention anybody from the academy maybe moving up or anything like that? Or was that just kind of ignored for this meeting because it really wasn't the goal of the meeting?
We touched on the academy a little bit, and Poreg was quick to point out that the academy has improved quite dramatically over the last 3 to 4 years. We used to have one of the weaker academies, and we were just in that playoff for the U18 side this season and only got knocked out in the semifinals. So there's definitely improvement, and there are a couple potential guys that they're looking to bring up. Honestly, the names escape me, though, because I wasn't super focused on that. But they also mentioned about kind of widening their youth scouting a little bit and utilizing some resources at the college level. DU, for example, is one of the resources they've used in the past, obviously with Courtney Ford coming into the squad, and that's a relationship they're continuing to work with as well to identify players that are in the college ranks and can immediately step into an MLS environment.
Now, did they discuss anything outside of the squad itself, like the front office bringing in some more people to maybe help scout and help Smith and that kind of thing? Because it's always seemed like we were always light in that department with scouts and just front office people in general.
Yeah, Poreg did mention that, and he said that he will be bringing in several people to work underneath him on the soccer operations side. One specific position he did mention was a director of scouting, so then it's actually really nice to have a person where just their job is to scout and identify players, and that's definitely one of the ways we've kind of fallen behind the more successful MLS clubs, is that they actually have somebody dedicated to that position, whereas in the past it was either Bravo or Poreg just using whatever method they can to stumble onto a guy and then trying to sign him, rather than being able to go through the analytics and really identify the individual players to see if they're a good fit or not.
So did they discuss giving the coach a little bit more power than they've had in the past? I know Smith basically lost his job for offering a player a job. Basically, now is Smith going to continue to entirely hold the reins, do you think? Or do you think he's going to allow the coach to kind of, as long as it's within the spectrum of what Smith okays, be more of a manager like they do in England?
We didn't really discuss that relationship specifically, but it was kind of inferred in the meeting that the relationship between Smith and the head coach, yet to be determined, will be similar to Poreg's relationship with Wayne. So, and basically they kind of are in charge of their own individual things, but at the same time they both have a say in what each of them does. Maybe that's not the best way to say it. It's kind of a collaborative relationship where it's not ultimately one guy saying yes or no to things. It's sort of more of a free-flowing process. Just at least that was the vibe I got from them, as the way he described it to me.
Well, and I like that. I think that it's been hard for coaches with the Rapids because of the way that they kind of ran the team. It was Bravo and Hinchy that kind of handled all of that stuff, and the coach was just kind of like, oh, well, you only get to deal with what we give you. And I think that for a coach to be effective, they should at least be involved in the conversation, even if they're not the decision maker.
Well, that is definitely the case with Pablo too. They whittled away his responsibilities as he progressed as a coach because he just couldn't handle all those individual things, and some of the tactical stuff was a little bit baffling and that kind of thing. So they tried to parcel off a lot of his responsibilities off to other people as much as possible to try and get the most out of him. But I don't think that will be the case if once they hire a coach that is kind of on the same, wavelength as Poreg is.
And I kind of I can't remember if we talked about it last podcast or not. Your opinion on Poreg. Do you want him to continue to have this job and be offered a permanent position for it? Do you feel that he's the right guy for that job? Because right now he's interim.
Yeah, I think he's going to get a trial period of at least a year, but basically from my interaction from him, I actually like him quite a bit, and just talking footy with him, he seems like probably one of the smarter soccer brains this club has ever had working in the front office, possibly even the smartest, and his experience definitely helps with that. But it's just the fact that when you talk to him, he gives you specifics and stuff that's a lot more concrete. It's not a lot of kind of pleasing platitudes and just kind of a bunch of bullshit that you normally used to get in the past whenever you had these interactions with the front office.
It's good to hear because, Brennan and I have had meetings outside of our interviews and stuff with him and talked with him, and you're right. It's just when you talk to him, he's straightforward. He really has some concrete ideas. He's definitely like a stats guy, which is how he's brought in some people for cheaper than what they should be paid. And it's good to hear from somebody else that might be a little bit more critical. That you feel that he's, would be a good guy for the job, and he's pretty straightforward. So we're not just giving lip service to the front office. He truly does know what he's talking about, and when you talk to him, he is very intelligent, very knowledgeable about the game, about players, and then to add into that he's a stats guy, and he really does know how to scout. And I think if you give him the proper team to scout, he's going to be able to build a good team for a cronky price.
Yeah, I agree. And, he's got the tools at his disposal now, and he doesn't have to report to anybody for kind of, the day-to-day stuff. So it really is his baby to play with. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of course he leads this team on.
You mentioned that he was bringing in more people to help support the club itself, not just players. And I feel like Brendan would be mad if we didn't ask about this. Is there going to be any focus or more focus on player fitness?
I assume there might be more focus on that. I think he did mention something also about having a team nutritionist, which is something we haven't had, and that actually can help improve performance. And
Yogi, the yoga instructor.
Didn't we trade our nutritionist to Orlando?
I have no idea.
That was a dig at Powers, by the way.
Yes, I know. He's a vegan or whatever. Some diet bender that
he's a vegan
or something.
He's a vegan without the powers from Scott Pilgrim.
But yeah, generally speaking,
anyways,
I think fitness is definitely going to be important. Though I think sometimes in the past with our teams there was too much of a focus on fitness, and kind of maybe a better way to articulate that is if you position yourself and you keep your shape and you play as an organized team, you don't have to run quite as much as you would in the current system, sort of Pablo ball and post Pablo ball, where it's a little more frantic and that kind of thing, where you wear players out late in the game, and sometimes we have to wait till late in the game at home to really do anything because we're hoping the other team's worn out as well. But I think part of it's getting the squad to work smarter, not harder as well.
Agreed. And I could never figure out what our problem was, because it seemed like our team was kind of sitting back, not doing anything like high press, and we were always getting tired the fastest, and we always had tons of injuries. So, like, you'd think if you weren't pressing hard and weren't really pushing yourself that you would have less injuries.
Yeah, exactly. It does prevent injuries. And the other thing Poreg did point out that he's acutely aware of, and something he's lamented that this club has really failed to do in the past, is kind of be able to take advantage of that fitness issue. Because we play at altitude, we can really spread the field and wear teams down, but we've never really implemented a system that's been able to do that effectively.
Yeah, and
so I definitely think that's something he wants to focus on.
I think you have to have the mentality of try and wear them out, especially when we're at home. We have the altitude advantage there, and try and take advantage of that. And then you need to be pushing forward and trying to really be offensive-minded at that point. I think that's always been a downfall for the Rapids outside of maybe a few years over their 20-something years.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like a more high-pressing approach on the defensive side of things would be effective because it forces the other team to move more, and it also prompts them to make mistakes, and that's the kind of thing we can capitalize on.
And I think that's what Smith's going to try and bring in, is he really wants to push for a more offensive-minded team. And we've been promised it for years and years, but I think we might actually start getting it next year. Any more Collins from you, Colin? Questions from you?
Yeah. After reading that letter, that email that you guys sent out, I feel like there's a newfound sense of optimism for the team that really has been missing this entire season. And I know that's kind of stating the obvious, but I think it's a pretty important thing because we've had to deal with just some awful stats all year. But now we're kind of finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, and it's not just this year. I mean, this is going back multiple years. Last year, 2016 aside, we have had to endure a pretty poor team that operates at a level that's quite a bit below the rest of the league. So, it really can't get any worse, but that's not the reason I have any optimism. The reason I have an optimism is just because the tone and approach with these new guys just seems so dramatically different. I mean, it feels like there's a real effort there to, make changes and do things rather than just kind of run point and keep the asshole accountants at KSE happy.
Well, and you got to look at it from the point of view that they've also cleared out the front office. Whether that's through attrition or people being removed, we now have new heads at the top of this corporate structure. And that's going to lead to change. And this change, from my interactions with both Wayne and Patrick, have been positive. I've been working with both of them for a couple years now. Wayne used to be the one that would bring out our interviews, and he's worked his way up. So I'm excited to see what they're going to do, not only from a player standpoint and a coach standpoint, but even from a media standpoint. It sounds like they're going to try and get us more access. They're going to try and be more open with their communication with the fan base, whether it's through us or through other mediums. It's a change. There's definitely a change in atmosphere in that front office, which is going to lead to a better team.
Well, and the other thing that they emphasized in the meeting, which is kind of important, is that it really seems like Josh Kroenke has bought into giving Poreg and Wayne the reins to this thing to try and run it the way they want to run it and to kind of see where it goes. And, having that support from ownership probably is important instead of having them be neglectful or just paddle in a completely different direction from what management actually wants to do. I mean, I still don't have a particularly high opinion of the Kroenkes. given the many years and years of their ownership history. But I think that is an important factor, is that they do have the support of ownership in what they're looking to do going forward.
Any more questions from you, Colin, or do we want to move on to the upcoming game?
Nothing really comes to mind right away. I mean, I feel like we've pretty much covered most of it.
And Chad, if you think of any questions while we're talking, we can bring them up after the discussion about the upcoming match against New York City Football Club, because they are really boring and couldn't come up with a cool name. So
almost as bad as New York United.
So we've got the game Saturday, home game, first one in a month, which means you can come out and hang out at the Undefeated Tailgate, which is going to be awesome. So I'm going to start with Colin. What do you think we need to do to get a win at home?
Well, something that's going to help here is keep in mind that the star for New York City, David Villa, is actually not going to be available. He is injured and thus will not be playing. And that's a real big deal. I was paying attention to their game against Portland last weekend, and you could really tell that without their star player, they are a lot weaker. They don't have the depth to replace him. Now, I understand that you can't replace the MVP. He was voted the MLS MVP last year, but even then. So we're not facing the almighty NYCFC. We're facing a much weaker one, and that helps. From a rapid standpoint of what do I think we need to do, I think we need to start Eigner, really.
Agreed.
We've been saying that a lot recently, too, but especially after the performance he had against Houston, I think he deserves the start.
Yeah,
that's a big
I
thing.
think they want to take a similar approach that they did against Houston, because it's a good team. But they need to bring out the similar kind of formation. They need those two anchoring midfielders in the center helping the defensive line. They need to play smart and compact and, kind of do what we did last year where we just wear teams out, and also pressure Pirlo quite a bit. That dispossession he gave up last week that resulted in a goal for Portland was comical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Pirlo cost them the game.
Yeah, I think his age is definitely starting to show, because, there wasn't even a foul there. I don't even know what he really felt like he was entitled to, whether it was the whistle blowing or what, but he just completely quit on that.
Yeah, he is, he's 38. That's ancient.
He looks like he's 70.
Ancient? Isn't that like the age of our goalkeeper?
Yeah.
This is coming from Colin, who's like barely turned 21, so.
I'm 23.
Ha!
Oh.
Get no credit around here.
So, Quinn, what would you like to see if you were coaching? What lineup would you throw out there and like to see?
Well, assuming Goshney and Heigner are 100%, I want to see both of them start on opposite wings really, really badly. I think that's the key to having a dynamic attack, and it gives Gashi somebody that he can actually play the ball off of that's, intelligent on the ball and off the ball. So I think it effectively make Gashi a better player as well, but I would really like to see the two of them pairing up and trying to make things happen going forward.
Now, would you run a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2?
If I've got both of them on the wings, I'd keep 5 in the midfield and 4 on the back line and just have your anchoring striker up top.
Is that
And
Doyle
you
or
have
Baji?
them. They're not playing as they're not playing as true wingers, but they're able to drift into the center. But I think that's going to be more effective. A 4-3-3, I think, would be a huge mistake, as you saw the results that put out, and shifting to a more stacked midfield with some withdrawn guys to help the back line was very effective against Houston. I don't think you want to, deviate from that formula at all.
So for me, I would like to see Gashi, Aigner, and Nana all in the game starting. That's what I would really like to see. I want to see some more Nana. I want to see if you keep him, because in my opinion, everybody is up for being removed from this team. So I think that we need to see these guys, see our starters, and see what they can do and prove themselves on whether we should keep them next year, and see what holes we need to actually fill, compared to what we've seen all season, where it's been injury ridden or Pablo's just mad at somebody or whatever the reason. The stars didn't align for him and they told him not to start a player. I don't really know. But we've seen a lot of these starters, in my opinion, sit on a bench or play minimal minutes. And I want to see us start them all.
And particularly players that take up an international slot on the roster, we need to take a real hard look at them, because those roster slots are so valuable. We can't waste them on dead weight at all.
Because I think if you've got a really expensive player, and we've already gotten rid of one of the worst, in my opinion, when we got rid of Powers. But there's still possibly some dead weight on this roster that's either earning too much money or just isn't performing. And if I want to get rid, with this opportunity, I want to get rid of as many people as I can to bring in as much as we can to make a team that's could win the cup next year.
Well, and the other thing to think about too, everybody talks about like players that are overpaid, and sometimes you want to look at players that aren't performing that aren't paid that much either. I mean, with the exception of prospects that are obviously still developing and that kind of thing, but you look at those guys that are making lower end salaries, you need to ask yourself the question, is it worth keeping them there for depth, or is it better to get rid of them to add that extra, 80, 90K that you can dump back into the roster and use that to sign a better player at a bigger salary for an open spot.
Such as like Defonte, in my opinion.
Yeah, Defonte's kind of the poster boy of that example, actually.
He's on the lower end, not making a ton of money, but has every time he's in the game, he at least costs us a goal.
He was a favorite of Pablo, and I think now that Pablo's not around anymore, I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be with the team. I actually think it's probably a pretty safe assumption that he will be gone. I mean, just common sense points to that direction anyway.
So since we got you on, and we got some time, who would you keep on this team for next season?
Well, obviously you keep our two DPs, Gashi, and because I think we can get more out of Gashi. I just think he was in a bad system, and he was never put in a proper system where he can play to his strengths. I mean, you obviously keep Howard because we've got him under contract and he sells a lot of shirts, and he's still a pretty decent goalkeeper. You keep Zach McMath as well because, he's got a ton of value and we can use him in multiple ways. I mean, you probably groom him to be Howard's replacement when he decides to retire or go someplace else. And then there's the obvious guys that are kind of that younger core that are definitely something we want to build around going forward. That's like your Axel Kuberg, your Marlon Harristons, those kind of guys. You also keep somebody like Serna around. Stefan Aigner's obviously going to be coming back because they signed him on a long-term deal, so he's going to be in the equation. And you probably keep Baji too. I mean, I think he's improved this year, particularly his strike rate.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
sort of that younger core guys that are performing really well and are kind of in that 100K to 200K salary range. I mean, there's some good options there for sure. And, in terms of guys you don't bring back, it's either the guys at the very bottom or at the very top of the salary spectrum for the most part.
So would you keep Ford?
I would absolutely keep Ford. He's a great prospect, and he's shown quite a bit of maturity. I mean, he's definitely somebody worth keeping in my view. He's probably actually the best young player we acquired this season. He's been the one bright spot we've had.
So
Unquestionably. It's hard to say anything other than keep Ford, because he's been great.
and he's a local.
Very few complaints with him.
Locals are great. I'm always a fan of keeping locals. Like, Cerna's a great player, and I want him to stay. Because local players really do help the crowd. Like, you just feel more attached to that. Like, when Cerna comes on the field, even though was never an all-star player, still got the crowd going. Because people knew who he was. He grew up here, and there's just that attachment to people that are local. So we have a question from chat from Flyby Cygnus.
Yes,
Cygnus?
it's several Rush references all in one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Besides Axel, and now we've already talked about Ford, who do you keep on the back line?
I would keep Harrison for sure, and I think you groom him into that right back position instead of shoehorning him into the midfield, because it looks like we're going to have better options up there in the first place, and he can be a really good dynamic right back that can come forward and have some recovery speed to compensate for other players that aren't quite as fast as him. But I think left back is a huge question mark. I don't think Mikael Williams is really that great of an option going forward. I mean, maybe you consider keeping him if he can get his green card in the offseason, but for his salary, his performance, and the fact he takes up an international roster spot, I don't think that really cuts the mustard. But I think left back is the one position you really specifically take a hard look at in the offseason.
So what about Watts? He's cheap. He's pretty solid. Whether he's starting or not, I'm of the opinion, unless you can get some value out of his trade, that you keep him. He's literally like 75K.
That. And one thing you do want out of your guys that come off the bench is versatility, and he's definitely a very versatile player. He can play in multiple positions, so that's kind of the ideal situation. He's got MLS experience. He has the ability to actually play quite well, and he is flexible enough he can plug holes in different areas of the roster, depending on how injuries stack up.
So let's move into our defensive midfielders. We've got Azira, we've got Saeed, we've got Nana. What do you do with those three?
Saeed, I would absolutely keep. Azira, I would keep as well. Nana's a real big question mark. Poreg seems to be pretty high on the guy, and mentioned that he's really versatile and he likes to move forward with the ball even when playing in a withdrawn position. Sort of like a Jermaine Jones to an extent, but it's really hard to judge him just because we haven't seen him, and he's really expensive. So I really don't know what to think about that. I'd really need to see more of him play. But, as it stands today and what we've seen of him, I probably would not keep him.
And would you offer Doyle another contract, a significantly lower contract, or would you just let him kind of fade?
I think I'd probably give him an offer at a obviously not DP money, a significantly lower salary. But, I'm not sure what Doyle's going to do. I mean, he may even retire. He's not that long from doing that. But, if Poreg asks him to come back, he probably will. So I think it just really depends. But obviously, if he comes back, he's not going to be making the kind of money that we saw this year.
And I assume we would keep someone like Baji still on the roster. Do you want to use him for maybe some trade bait?
I think you hang on to Baji, but trade bait is relative because it always really depends on who you can get. I mean, there's a difference between you throwing him into a deal where you're getting somebody that is a really good team of the year caliber starter versus just some kind of roster filler guy. If it's for a like trade for a roster filler, wouldn't consider getting rid of him at all. I'd hang on to him.
So if you were looking at this upcoming off season, what 2 positions would you be focusing your search on as your top 2, where you're like, I need these 2 specifically?
As I mentioned before, left back is something we really need to sort out because we really don't have any good options in that position right now. So I would look very hard at that. And then I'd also look at up top, kind of at that pivot position. So, depending on what kind of formation you trot out, I mean, you're going to assume you're playing Gashi and Eigner on the wings, and you need somebody in the middle. And maybe you're looking at either like a true number 10, a guy that'll sit in the middle and distribute the ball, or you're looking at somebody that's kind of a center forward that can play slightly withdrawn behind a target striker, but is versatile. He can come back and retrieve the ball. He can distribute, but he's also a really dangerous threat up top. So kind of that central attacking role is the other place where I think we need to really focus on.
Colin, I'm going to send this question to you. Who do you keep, and what positions are you going to look out for?
Man, this is worthy of like a whole nother podcast in and of itself. Which is why I'm actually kind of like debating on if I want to get into this too much. There's a couple people I think we should absolutely get rid of, and like number 1 on that list is Defont. Number 2 on that list for me is Williams. And most of the reason for that is because with Williams, you have, and it's kind of hard to argue if it's some flat addition or some like 1.5x factor onto his cost, but that international slot is a big deal. And I think he's not quite living up to the point where we should use that for him.
That makes sense. Makes sense to me. I guess back into the game with the upcoming match. Chat, start getting your scores ready. Colin, I'm going to have you go first. What do you think the score is going to be?
I'm kind of leaning towards a 2-1 win.
2-1 win. Who do you think is going to get the goals?
I think Baji and Eigner. And I think Marlon is going to be on the assist for one of those 2.
All right. Quinn?
I'm going to go with a 1-1 draw, I think. I mean, kind of high and optimistic after the Houston game, but at the same time, we are still a team that's struggling and has a lot of issues, and Man City 2 Electric Boogaloo, or whatever you want to call them, is still a pretty good team, and I think they'll be pretty challenging to us, but I think we can get a 1-1 draw, and I'll say Baji can get another goal.
I'm hoping for Baji to get another goal. I'm hoping Baji hits his 10-goal mark that he put at the beginning of the season. Still got some games left, and he's at 7, I believe. So I'm going to go with a 3-1 win. I think that Baji's going to have 2, and Gashi's going to have the other one. I think Eigner's going to be involved in at least 2 of those goals. So I assuming that they all start. We have no idea what's going to happen on that field, so it's really hard to make those guesses. But in chat, McCleave's saying a 2-2, saying that's positive. I don't know, that's kind of semi-positive. That's more neutral, McCleave. 2-2 is a draw. Flyby is saying 2-0. Baji, goal off of another Eigner, and Doyle off of Marley assist. So he's putting a lot of faith in our defense. That's kind of become Swiss cheese. So, do we have any announcements that we need to do, Quinn? I don't know of any, so I was going to ask you.
I don't have any hard announcements. I don't think. I mean, obviously, we don't have a viewing party this weekend because we're playing at home. Senior board elections are going to be coming up here, and we'll start, getting that information out to members and roll out the vote and everything. But, other than that, that's really the only things that are kind of immediately on the horizon.
And go support our growler program, which is pretty awesome. Go buy a growler, go get some beer. We all like that kind of stuff. I know this weekend's going to be a blast. We'll be at the tailgate. If you want to come meet any one of us, we're all going to be behind different tents. So come hang out and talk to us. Outside of that, don't forget to follow us. Our social media just loves you. So if you're listening to this and not live in chat, as you notice, we've been answering a lot of questions from there. You can find that at twitch.tv/drunkenmonkc38, and we stream every Tuesday at 4:30, usually, ish. We have, obviously, our website, voice.c38sg.com, which is off of the main website, c38sg.com. So go to those for all information regarding C38 and the media team. Facebook, we got Facebook, the Voice of C38, so go check that out. If you want to join our Discord where chat can happen, just ask us on Twitter and we'll send you a link. Outside of that, Colin, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at the Ace Arbiter.
Anywhere else? You just do Twitter? That's the only one?
Mostly Twitter. Facebook too, but...
All right. He can go to Twitter. Quinn doesn't have a Twitter.
You can find me in a fridge box under a bridge.
You can find him topless on the capo stand. That's where you can yell at him, okay?
If he's going real good, he goes bottomless too.
Pants down, scarves up.
You can find me on Twitter at drunkenmonk_C38. Thanks for listening, and hope to see you all out at the tailgate.